Hi, I'm Amit Gurbaxani. I'm a music journalist who's been covering the Indian music scene for over 2 decades. I'm here with TuneCo India to give you a journalist guide on how independent musicians can promote their music. The biggest change in music journalism over the past decade is that uh, the journalists are no longer either the gatekeepers or, to an extent, tastemakers any longer. Uh, but the role of a journalist has always been to journal or to document. And I think we now live in an age of too much information rather than too little. So, in a way, the role of a journalist is even more important than ever before. You need journalists to basically distill all this information down, analyze it, and make sense of it all for listeners and readers and viewers. And that's also one of the reasons why, in my own career, I've evolved from being a music journalist who used to only write about artists and gigs and releases, which I still do, but to write about the music business as well. Well, it's there's never been a better time to be an independent musician, and there's never been a worse time to be an independent musician. And the reason why I say this is because while the tools of creation and distribution of music have been democratized, the tools of promotion and revenue generation still remain relatively concentrated. Earlier, if you were a musician, you know, you could sort of focus on just creating music. Today, it's a given that if you're an independent musician, you have to be an entrepreneur and somebody who's essentially managing their own business and looking at multiple sources of income to put out a work of art. Now, I hate to call music a product, but I won't. But I think unless you're lucky enough to be from a country where the state basically supports art for art's sake, uh, today music and business are intertwined. I think anybody who's passionate about music is covering music in a way. Avid gig goers who go for gigs every week and post stories about them are covering music also. And today I often find, for instance, that if there's a guest list for a concert, you'll not only have music journalists, but you'll also have regular gig goers who are invited for those shows so that they can spread the word. Essentially, I wouldn't call them influencers because I don't particularly like that term, but they are sort of, I guess, in a way, tastemakers is probably a better way to put it. On the traditional side of things, I think today, uh, I've said this, and it's probably a little cynical sounding, but the truth is that culture journalism is sort of an endangered species across the world, and you have a handful of places that write about music. There are Instagram accounts that are dedicated to covering indie music. There are music magazines, a few of them that are still around. There are newspapers, daily newspapers that have culture sections and they cover music. So I think and if you're an independent musician, you kind of need to do a little bit of homework to sort of figure out what are all the places that do cover music, but there are quite a few. And like I said, don't restrict yourself to just journalists. Look out at all the people who regularly go for gigs, reach out to them, and they will be a way to find a new audience. How does one craft a compelling pitch for a journalist? I've actually written about this very thing for the TuneCo website. It's an article called Pitching to Press, the 23-point guide. I'd say approach a journalist the same way you would approach a playlist editor or a radio jockey, basically anybody who you want to check out your music. Press releases are great, uh, but they're advisable to send out when you have something significant to say. And whatever you do, remember to tell a compelling story about yourself or about the music. But before you do any of that, please write a bio. That's essential because that's the first place any journalist would go to. And don't forget to include a recently taken photo. In a bio, the bare minimum that you should include is, of course, your name and your full name if you happen to use only your first name as a performance name. And if you use an alias, then preferably your real name, unless, of course, you prefer to remain anonymous. If you have an unusual pronunciation, maybe it would help to also include how people should actually say your name. Then I'd say include the city you're from. Also include things like major career milestones. For example, if you played a festival, a major festival, do include that. list out significant releases. If you're so inclined, then also include your inspirations and influences. By including all of this, you might spare yourself having to answer the same questions every time a journalist interviews you, because I know that's a common complaint that musicians have. But sometimes, if you don't send a bio, you kind of, you're sort of setting yourself up for that. To approach a journalist, you do need to be an artist of a certain caliber, but you don't necessarily need to have a huge fan base. The former is subjective, of course, but the latter is objective, and anybody can, find out this information because it's publicly available on your social media, on streaming platforms. But the role of a journalist is essentially to document and to observe and tell people about new and exciting music. It is a journalist's job to go out and seek exciting new sounds, to write about fresh trends, and to tell people about artists that are breaking the status quo. I've always said that a good journalist is kind of like a good A&R person. Both need to have great ear. For me personally, the best way to reach out to a journalist is email. It's also the way you can send out the maximum information. You can send out smart links and links to a drive page where you can include your press kit, music and stuff like that. I'm not a fan of DMs, but I know that a lot of other journalists do check DMs and respond to them. I also get messages on WhatsApp, which I find a bit intrusive if I've never met the musician. So if you do that, you'll run the risk of being left on red. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe to TuneCo India's YouTube channel.